Good morning to all our participants. Thank you for joining us in this very fantastic event that we have with William Laval. That and he is from the Irish Whiskey Association. Thank to all our audience to joining us this day. Welcome here with us. It's also Jorge Vera from Cluster Mezcal, Oaxaca. Jorge, how are you? Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
And we have William. William, good morning. Thank you for joining us this day. And as a way of presentation, please let me tell you that the Irish Whiskey Association is the representative body of the Irish whiskey industry, representing 47 companies. William is the director of the Irish Whiskey Association since 2017. William previously worked as a special advisor to the Irish Deputy Prime Minister, and William also is currently vice chairman of the International Trade Committee of the Spirits Europe, the representative Federation of Europe's spirits industry. So, William, many thanks for accepting our invitation. For us, it's a fantastic opportunity to have you here. As I mentioned, as I confessed to you a few minutes ago, this is the first time that we are running in other than Spanish, that it's the usual language that we handle. I'm sure we are very excited to having you here. We are very excited to having this event in English. We hope that all will be very satisfied for this. And thank you for all once again to all our invitation. The invitees, the audience, and if it's okay, please, Jorge, I don't know if you can formally will introduce the event by or on behalf of the Cluster Mezcal Oaxaca.
Sí, yes, of course. Well, good morning, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And this is the first time we are doing this activity in English. We normally carry out the event in Spanish. We speak about denomination of origin and geographical indications. So we have today this really fantastic guest, William Lavelle. And well, we're going to introduce you in Spanish as well. And then so people normally understand in English, but then sometimes the people have some they're relatively doubtful about asking in English. So I will introduce you in Spanish and then we'll come back to English. Muy buenos días a todos. Pues es un placer realmente tenerlos aquí a nombre también pues del clúster de Mezcal Oaxaca y pues bueno también a nombre de nuestro querido Sergio. Sergio es una figura pues muy importante para nosotros en todo lo que tiene que ver la indicación geográfica y denominaciones de origen en México y pues bueno es una figura también que ha estado presente con nosotros en tema de la protección del caso del Mezcal Oaxaca. Y pues bueno, esta es también una serie de, bueno, ¿qué es lo que nos hace importante estas denominaciones de origen? ¿Qué es lo que nos dan? Entonces, por eso también queremos invitar a diferentes invitados de diferentes lugares, pues que nos digan cuáles han sido sus actividades, qué es lo que han hecho, cuáles son sus retos, qué es lo que podemos aprender también de ellos, para que entonces podamos nosotros también ver, entender y también proteger nuestra denominación de origen mezcal. Entonces, pues bueno, tenemos realmente pues un súper invitado. William Lavelle, pues es el director de Drinks Island y de la Asociación de Whisky Irlandés. Entonces, pues, nos va a platicar sobre esa experiencia. Entonces, la idea, la dinámica es que, pues bueno, hace su presentación y quien tenga preguntas, pues bueno, al final trataremos nosotros también de hacerlas, la interpretación hacia el inglés o del inglés al español. Y pues bueno, también esto es como muy interesante, pues ver qué es lo que pasa en el resto del mundo, ¿no? So it's a really pleasure, William, to have you here and to know more about what you are doing within the geographical indication of the Irish whiskey. So we are really looking forward to know more about it, and we really appreciate you that you are here to talk to us, to know more about what you are doing and how you are doing things. And
Excellent.
Sergio, we really appreciate what you are doing to help us with to protect the denomination of origin mezcal.
Thank you, Jorge. As Jorge mentioned, please, to all of our audience, please feel free to participate, raising your hand or uh, placing any question in the question and answer box that you have in the program. You are free to raise any question to our very valued and very appreciated lecturer, today's lecturer. And if it's okay with you, William, please go forward and show us and let us know more about this fantastic, very recognized spirits in the world. We in Mexico are, well, I know that many people are a lover of whiskey here in Mexico, and what else that hearing about the first whiskey in the world in the history. Please let us know, and very welcome, William. Thanks.
Thank you, Sergio and Jorge, for the introduction. Before I share my slides, I just would like to say welcome, or as we say in Ireland, Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes from Ireland to all of our colleagues in Cluster Mezcal, Oaxaca, and the rest of the Mexican GI industry. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to say that in Ireland we're seeing increasing sales of mezcal, so it is good to it's good to be here connecting with you. Thank you to Sergio for hosting. Thank you to our colleagues in the EU Commission for making the connection, and I believe they're on the line. And also like to acknowledge some colleagues from the Irish Embassy in Mexico who are on the call. So I'm now going to share my screen, and hopefully it will appear, and you can give me a thumbs up if it is you can see that.
Perfect. It's going perfect.
Oh, okay. So as Sergio said, my name is William Lavelle, and I am the director of the Irish Whiskey Association. And I'm here today to speak about Irish whiskey, which is a protected geographic indication and one of Europe's leading geographic indications. So first of all, about our association. We are a relatively new group. We were founded in 2014. We currently represent 47 companies who between them represent 98% of the global sales of Irish whiskey and 95% of the employment. So a very representative association. 75% or 3/4 of our members are small and medium businesses. And that's very important for us. We also have the large brands and the large companies, but as I say, 3/4 are small and medium. And very importantly, we work across the island of Ireland. So both the Republic of Ireland, which remains part of the European Union, and Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and since Brexit is no longer part of the EU. It has made our life a bit more complicated, but we're very proud to work on that all-island basis. Our mission is to protect, promote and represent the Irish whiskey category in Ireland and globally in order to secure the position of Irish whiskey as one of the world's leading spirits categories. And over recent years, our association has developed just as our industry and sales of Irish whiskey have grown. And I'll speak about some of that today. We're very proud of our history in Ireland. Ireland is the home of whiskey. The first records of whiskey distillation anywhere in the world date from Ireland from the year 1324. Indeed, the name whiskey is an English version of the Gaelic or the Irish language name for whiskey, which was Uisce Beatha, and Uisce Beatha became anglicized as whiskey. So we're the home of whiskey and the home of the name of whiskey. And it was Irish monks and religious orders who brought whiskey making to Scotland and elsewhere. And we're very proud of that history. But that history has been very checkered. Right up to the end of the 1800s, Ireland was the largest whiskey producing nation in the world. Indeed, about 70%, or nearly 3/4 of all the whiskey sold in the United States, came from Ireland. But in the 20th century, between wars, trade wars, and of course prohibition, all of that changed and the Irish whiskey industry collapsed. By 1980, there were only 2 distilleries left on the island of Ireland, and we were only selling 300,000 cases. And of course, by case, I refer to a 9-litre case, 12 bottles. So our industry was nearly gone. But we've had a phenomenal decade between 2010 and 2020, going from 4 distilleries to 38 distilleries, as that map has shown. And Irish whiskey exports, or Irish whiskey sales around the world, increased by over 140%, from just under 5 million cases in 2010 to 12 million cases last year. And Irish whiskey exports are now worth 890 million to our island's economy. So we were very proud of that growth over that past decade. And we do recognize that there has been really strong growth in other categories such as mezcal. And I think there's a lot of common learnings as an industry that has undergone rapid growth. So let me tell you a bit about our markets. Irish whiskey is sold in 140 markets around the globe. However, that is very much led by Europe, North America, and South Africa, or has been. The United States, our largest market, accounting for 41% of all sales. But in recent years, we have seen market diversification intensifying. So much more growth, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, which is now a real counterbalance to the United States, and growth beginning to crystallize or intensify in Africa, in Asia, and to a lesser extent in Latin America, but we are very hopeful for further growth in Mexico and neighboring markets in coming years. I'll talk a bit about the different types of Irish whiskey, but blended Irish whiskies currently dominate. And I think the 3 major brands that you would be aware of Jameson, Tullamore Dew, and Bushmills, account for 85% of sales, and they're all blended whiskies. And of course, Bushmills is owned by the House of Cuervo, so it has Mexican owners. However, we have seen over recent years a substantial increase in other brands and a lot more competition from new brands. And in addition to blended Irish whiskey, the subcategories of single pot still and single malts are gaining. You might be familiar of the term single malt, and Scotch whiskey is famous for its single malts. We also in Ireland have pot still, and I'll explain those differences in a moment. And of course, the word single meaning it comes from one distillery, whereas for many of our blended whiskies, the whiskey might come from multiple distilleries. Because we've been making whiskey for longer than any other nation, we have more ways of making whiskey. And Irish whiskey has a depth and a diversity which is unrivaled among other whiskey categories. So whereas Scotch might be famous for its single malts and its blends of malt and grain, and US for its potentially corn-based and bourbon, in Irish whiskey we have a lot more diversity and we have a very unique story. And that's why our geographic indication is important. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that story and about Irish whiskey. There are, in effect, 4 types of Irish whiskey. There is malt whiskey, distilled in a copper pot still, with 100% malted barley. So no different to Scotch single malt. But we also in Ireland have what's called pot still whiskey, which is distilled similar to single malt in a pot still, but with a mix of malted and unmalted barley, and sometimes other grains like rye or oats. There was no other country in the world that used unmalted barley until recently. It was very much an Irish thing. We also produce grain whiskey, which, unlike pot and malt, is not made in copper pot stills, but instead is produced in column stills through a continuous distillation process. And that's primarily made from maize or corn or wheat. And then, as I say, blended whiskey is the most popular form of Irish whiskey and the most common form of whiskey on the shelves. And a blended whiskey is a blend of 2 or 3 of those types. So Jameson would be a blend of grain whiskey and pot still whiskey. Tullamore Dew would be a blend of all 3 types of whiskey. And in some cases, you'll get a blend just of pot, still, and malt. So there's a lot of permutations. Irish whiskey is double, or in most cases, triple distilled, whereas American whiskey might only be distilled once, Scotch only twice. In Ireland, we predominantly triple distill, although double distilled is also quite popular. Irish whiskey must be matured in wooden barrels on the island of Ireland for at least 3 years. But in many cases, the whiskey that will be on the shelves has been in a barrel for 5 or 6 years or more. And of course, there's great age statement whiskies, 12-year-old, 18-year-old, 21, and so on. In Ireland, unlike America, where they can only use an American oak barrel once, or in Scotland, where they're limited to the type of barrels, in Ireland, we use more types of wood, so not just oak, and more types of casks than any other whiskey. We reuse casks that were previously used for bourbon and sherry, being the most popular types, but also beers used for wines and beers, and indeed in recent years, a few producers using casks that have been used in the mezcal industry. And as a result, Irish whiskey has become a world leader in cask finishing and in innovation using casks of different types. Our island is very important to us. You know, Irish whiskey must be produced on the island of Ireland, and we are a unique geography. It's where the continent of Europe meets that wild Atlantic. So our climate is very much a wild Atlantic climate, very wet. We're more southerly than Scotland. And that means our latitude and our longitude affects how our whiskey matures and the rate of evaporation from the barrels. And that impacts, our geography impacts our whiskey. And we often say it's our craft and our craftiness. By craft, I mean it's the skills and the art of our distillers and our blenders who have perfected the craft of whiskey making over centuries, from how they cook the distillations to how they blend and finish our whiskies. And all of that done to curate the esters or the chemical compounds which give the whiskey the taste profile. They've been doing this for centuries. They know what they're doing. But also our craftiness, or as we might say, our rebelliousness, or our ingenuity. For a long time, Ireland was part of the British Empire. And there are interesting stories about how the Irish whiskey industry didn't want to pay taxes to the British. So the British brought in a tax on malt. So we began using unmalted barley. And they brought in a tax on stills. So we began using larger pot stills. And all of those helped to shape and define and craft and change the nature of our whiskey. So what we say is that Irish whiskey and Ireland go hand in hand. Our people, our places, and our practices, they're all unique, and they are what define Irish whiskey. And it is our geographic indication which defines and protects that in law. And it is our assurance of uniqueness. So I'd say Irish whiskey is unique, and it really is defined by all these things, and our GI protects that. So coming to talk about our geographic indication. Irish whiskey was designated as a GI since 1989. The industry came together in the last decade to prepare a new technical file, or as it's now known under EU law, a product specification. That was submitted in 2014, and that is the current set of rules that defines the permitted practices in the production of Irish whiskey and the labelling rules. Now, I'm not going to read this slide, but that is the legal definition of Irish whiskey. So it's very technical. If Sergio shares the slides afterwards, you can read that. But we are, despite our depth and diversity, we do have clear rules on what can be done. And there is an entire technical file underpinning the geographic indication. Our geographic indication is defined in Irish, EU, and UK law. And I suppose this is very important for those of you who are familiar with Brexit and the UK and Northern Ireland leaving the European Union. It's very important that we work across governments now, both within Ireland, the EU, European Union, and the United Kingdom. The Irish whiskey geographic indication is protected in trade agreements that both the European Union and the United Kingdom have. For example, the wine and spirits agreements between the European Union and Mexico. And we are very lucky now that 85% of Irish whiskey's global sales are to markets where Irish whiskey is protected. And that GI protection is very important because it gives producers the confidence to invest in a market, knowing there is a legal recourse to addressing infringements. What we have seen as Irish whiskey has grown, and remember I said 140% growth, when you grow at that speed, it won't surprise you that there are cowboys and crooks who want to get in on the action. And I'll say a bit more about some of those misleading brands in a moment, but this map shows all of the countries in green we are protected. Russia is the big one where we are currently working to get protection. And as you see, yellow and orange where we're currently working to get protection as well. But as I said, Irish whiskey is growing so fast, the sales are so strong that particularly in our larger markets, in the United States and indeed in Russia, we are seeing a lot of infringements. So what are the common infringements? In places like Russia, we have seen quite a lot of domestically produced spirits being passed off as Irish. Sometimes they're not even whiskey. It could be a vodka with some caramel colouring, and it's been presented as Irish whiskey. In the United States and Canada, we have a lot of problems with actual whiskies, but produced in the United States and Canada, being labelled as Irish style or Irish like. They're not Irish whiskey, but they're being labelled in a way to try to confuse the consumer. And we see traditional Irish place names and family names and emblems, the shamrock, the harp, a map of the island of Ireland, they're being used particularly in markets like the United States where there would be a close cultural connections with Ireland, those emblems and names being used to mislead consumers. So how do we respond and how do we protect Irish whiskey? Our member companies, particularly the larger companies, have decided to contribute a substantial legal budget. So this year alone, we will be spending, over maybe €350,000 in terms of protecting Irish whiskey. And how do we do that? Well, one of the first things is to register Irish whiskey as a GI or a certification mark in export markets. It's not always automatic that it will come in with a trade agreement. And there are a lot of countries where there are no trade agreements. So we have to, as an industry, go to those markets and register Irish whiskey as a certification mark or as a geographic indication, meaning only authentic Irish whiskey produced in line with the rules can be labelled or presented as Irish whiskey. Obviously, it's much easier if we can get it in a trade agreement, so we are continuously lobbying the governments to include GI protection in trade agreements. But protection is only as good as enforcement. So we have invested in increased market monitoring. And that doesn't mean you have to go into the market. We are using currently an agency who have designed an algorithm to monitor online websites in key markets, websites of retailers, to examine brands, to look out for potential infringements. Sorry, just go back there. Excuse me, but also, most importantly, we are taking action against infringements. I think last year, during 2020, we took action against over 30 different infringing products around the world, as well as objecting to another 20 or so trademark applications which were in breach. In some cases, that's just writing a legal letter and explaining a brand is in breach of the geographic indication and they stop. But sometimes we must go further, and sometimes legal action or complaints to the statutory authorities in those markets are required. Of course, it's not just about protection. We are also positively promoting Irish whiskey. And in recent years, some of the work we have done has been to bring our companies together, large and small, to develop an agreed narrative. Every brand will talk about their brand differently, but we worked to come up with an agreed narrative about how we speak about Irish whiskey as a category. Out of that, we came up with the idea of depth and diversity, and we are currently highlighting that through an online and social media campaign. We understood that we could leverage the collective by including multiple brands or personalities in our activity. So every brand might have a Meet Our Master Distiller event, but what we can do is organise discussions with multiple master distillers and have a lot more dynamic events. We have always had active engagement with media and social media. We've regularly hosted tasting events with media and also with buyers and major retailers and distributors. Over the past year, a lot of that has obviously been online due to COVID, but we've also hosted inward visits, particularly for some of the liquor control boards in the United States and Canada, where we as an association can bring them to Ireland in a way that individual companies could not, because their code of ethics might prevent them from going on trips paid for by a company or one business. But as an association, we can do that. And we also work very closely with the Irish and indeed Northern Irish UK embassies around the world to help promote Irish whiskey. Part of promotion is, of course, tourism. And we see tourism and opening up to visitors as being an important way of putting our geographic indication and our authenticity on display. We're bringing people in to see how we make the whiskey, the people and the places that define Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey distilleries have become world leaders in experiential tourism, and we've been very proud of that. We had over 1 million visitors in 2019, but unfortunately last year, we saw an 88% reduction as a result of COVID. We have developed a new promotional platform, Irish Whiskey 360, and the audience can visit that in your own time and see how we see the various visitor attractions that we have. And hopefully at some stage in the future, when we all travel again, we'd love to welcome you to Ireland to come and visit some of our distilleries. I'm going to finish with 2 slides talking about what I see as the opportunities and the challenges for Irish whiskey and for GI categories generally. For us, the big opportunities remain the continued growth in consumer demand for authentic and premium spirits. Premiumization is very important. Consumers who have been introduced to Irish whiskey are more, are interested in going up the price point, paying for more premium, more expensive whiskies, and premiumization is something that's very important. Market diversification, as I said, we've seen strong growth in Europe, in North America, or US and Canada. We'd like to see more growth in more markets, and we think that is a big opportunity. E-commerce and online selling has provided fantastic new opportunities for particularly our smaller companies to get their brand before consumers and to sell direct to consumers. And at the moment, in a lot of our major markets, the on-trade, so the pubs, the restaurants, are currently closed. We believe that when the pubs and the on-trade reopen, they will probably reopen in a very different way, and how people go to the pub will be different. And we believe there's opportunities there for cocktails and for longer drinks. And we will be promoting Irish whiskey in a different way when that on-trade reopens. But there are also challenges, and we are already seeing these challenges. We're seeing a return to protectionism in many markets, with trade disputes, retaliatory tariffs, and indeed countries introducing new national definitions for spirits and whiskey that run counter to the long-standing definitions or run counter to the definitions set down under geographic indications. The EU-US dispute over Airbus and Boeing, so tariffs being put on Irish whiskey, a single malt Irish whiskey from Northern Ireland. We don't want to see that, but we are seeing more threats from international trade. As I explained, we are seeing increased incidents of GI infringement. So as Irish whiskey sells more, we are seeing more non-compliant Irish whiskey appearing. And that's industry and our job to try to address that, as I've explained. And there are bigger issues, I think, that will affect all GI categories in terms of future consumer reaction to long-distance supply chains and distributions. Already people are asking the question, is it right that we are shipping, millions of bottles of spirits in heavy glass bottles across the oceans? How does that fit in with our sustainability agenda? So we have begun a discussion within our own industry on developing a new narrative on sustainability. And that, I think, will become a pressing demand from consumers into the future. So, Sergio, Jorge, that is the end of my presentation for now, but I'm very happy to answer questions or to discuss any of the points I raised in this presentation. So I'd finally say thank you, or in the Irish language, when we are saying cheers, we say sláinte. So thank you and sláinte.
Many thanks, William, for your very clear, specific, and very direct to the point presentation. It has been very very interesting point, because as I mentioned, whiskey, there are lots of whiskey lovers in Mexico, I may say so. I'm one of them. Of course, I like mezcal too, but I'm also a whiskey lover. And however, I think that not many people knows about the heritage, the grounds of this spirit, of this very interesting spirit. In order to prepare this presentation on my side, I have checked some information, YouTube videos, etc. I learned that you have more than 4 centuries with some regulations, and despite this maybe not so continuous way to work on the in regard to the production and the regulation of the Irish whiskey. Well, you have lots of experience talking about time, and before opening the floor for any question, I have one question for you. few weeks ago, I had a discussion with an alleged specialist, intellectual, well, not intellectual property specialist, but appellations of origin specialist. And well, she's Mexican, and but she has lots of time. Well, she lived already in Europe for a long time ago, and she mentioned that according to her experience, for the consorcios or the associations, the consejos reguladores, the regulatory councils, etc. Supposedly, they are more focused, or they value the appellation of origin because, or the geographical indication, because of money, because finally represents more money for them. However, I stated that I believe, and I think, and that's my question, that for many people, and that's why I'm questioning to you about your point of view on this. For many people, it's not only a matter of money. It's not only a matter of earning money or having better distributed the product, but also a matter of proud, a matter of knowing that you have a very good product. This product must be distinguished among the other ones, not because the other ones are good or bad, but because your product is special. And of course, I think that it is special for you in the first instance. So, what's your point of view on this? Do you think that the appellation of origin or the geographical indication, it's a matter of money, or it's a matter of pride, or what's your point of view, your personal point of view on this?
Um, there's a number of ways I think to look at this, but I think if we go back and start with the consumer around the globe is looking let's say, middle-income consumers with more disposable income are more willing to pay a premium for authentic quality foodstuffs. And they're interested in foodstuffs and drinks from around the world. So in the same way in Ireland here, we might buy tequila or mezcal. We might buy, feta cheese from Greece, or Parma ham from Italy, or champagne from France. We're interested in quality, authentic food stuff. But I think the consumer is also very keen that they want to know the backstory. If they're going to pay slightly more for this product, they want to know that it's authentic. They want to know the backstory. How is it made? Who makes it? And the geographic indication is that assurance of authenticity. So I think they go hand in hand. I think consumers willing to pay more and the geographic indication giving that authenticity, I think they've come together at a very good time. So yes, I think you can get more price, more value from a GI product, but that's because that's the consumer is willing to pay for something authentic. But the other part of this is, if we're talking about money, it's, from a business, and I talk to a lot of businesses. So for example, a lot of our member companies are looking to Asia now. Historically, Irish whiskey sales in Asia were zero. There was no history of selling Irish whiskey in Asia. As I said, you could go to a pub in Dublin and they would sell, that one pub would sell more Irish whiskey than all of China bought. But now our businesses are looking to Asia, but they're concerned that if they invest, and there's a big investment in advertising and promotion, what happens if a domestic distillery decides to produce a whiskey and sell it into the retailers using their good business relationship as an Irish whiskey? Our members want to ensure that they have that legal recourse that protects them if they go and take that investment. So to answer that question, the geographic indication is about money in one sense, in that it gives a confidence to consumer who wants to pay more money for something as the authenticity and quality, and it gives more confidence to businesses to put money into markets knowing that the name is protected. So that might be a long answer, but hopefully it helps. It helps respond.
So it's really important, the story behind the product, in fact.
Yeah.
Very, very, very well. Jorge, I don't know if you have questions for our lecturer.
Yes, William, well, thanks a lot for the presentation. It was very, very clear, and you explained everything what you do and how you protect the geographic indication. It sheds a lot of light on what we do with the mezcal. And also mezcal is despite the fact that it's a drink that has been produced for many years, it has been protected only in the last 25 years. So it's relatively new that it has been protected, no? With the denomination of origin. And it's one of the very few products that we have in Mexico with denomination of origin as well. So I would say that basically the two main products are tequila and mezcal. And I would like to know more, if you could explain, or you can develop further, a little bit, how's your relationship with the government, with other firms, and with the European Union? How you strengthen, how do you use that relations to strengthen the geographic indication? How they have helped it, if they have done it uh, to increase awareness about the Irish whiskey. And the other question is about you talked about enforcement, and that's very important. How do you do it? How do you carry out? How do you work closely with other organizations, with the government, with national governments, supranational governments? I think that would be quite interesting to know, because it's something that we at the moment we have, no? That it's for instance, that's um, agave spirits from South Africa, and they said mezcal style, no, or mezcal type from South Africa, from different regions, and even from California in the US. So we're very interested to know more about how you do things.
Yes, I think relationships with the government and government agencies and authorities is very important. Starting with our domestic government, so the Irish government, also the EU Commission. Obviously, once we get that legal protection, it is obviously in their interest as well to protect the geographic indication of their country. But the more you can demonstrate the economic contribution of your industry, we have found the more willing government and governments are to support us. So one of the big things we have done in recent years is to help to explain to government how many jobs we're creating, how much barley we are buying from Irish farmers, how many tourists, how much tax we're paying, the value of exports. And I think it's very important that at all times you explain that economic contribution as a way of making sure that you have your own government on side. But internationally, because 96% of Irish whiskey is exported, we really have to have a global focus. And that means doing quite a lot of work on the international front. Now, thankfully, we are members of Spirit Europe, which is a fantastic federation comprising 10 multinational companies and 32 trade associations across Europe. I'm lucky at the moment to be vice chairman of the trade committee. So, when we have international issues, we can work through Spirit Europe as our member body to help us with those. But often when there's issues specific to Irish whiskey, we do have to engage internationally. When it comes to protection, we do retain a series of IP lawyers in key markets around the globe, but we also have to lobby. So, case in point, an example is that in the United States at the moment, Irish whiskey is protected, but unfortunately, we do not have the same level of protection that Scotch whiskey has. You can't, so Irish like and Irish type whiskies are appearing on the market availing of loopholes in the TTB regulations, the TTB being the Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau. We're currently actively lobbying in Washington to encourage the TTB to change their regulations. So we have to maintain those relationships with authorities in export markets as well. And none of that is easy. It's hard work and it's consistent work. But it means ultimately it goes back to our member companies deciding to give the budget to the association to carry out this lobbying and this legal work in Ireland and internationally, and putting in place the resources to do that. We're only a small association. We only have 4 people working for us, but it's, you know, and our budget is not very big, and we spend it's what our members give us, and our members have been very clear. Protection and trade policy are our priorities. So, you know, hopefully that answers. There's no easy way. It's just hard work.
Very well. In order to clarify this point, but maybe not. Well, we have here huge specialists in intellectual property matters as well as in geographical indications, but maybe not all our audience know this, that according to the European regulations, a spirit cannot bear an appellation of origin. And that's why we have this discussion before in the initiation of this event. But in Mexico, we have tequila, mezcal, bacanora, sotol, etc., that are distillates, are spirits, and they bear an appellation of origin. However, in Europe, some other spirits, like in this case the Irish whiskey, cannot bear an appellation of origin, not because you don't have all that relation, all that heritage to bear an appellation of origin, but because the regulations, as long as I remember, allows to have an appellation of origin, but only for agriculture products as well as wine. But in the case of spirits, you cannot. And this is only a point to attest, and it's an important point to raise. I have here 3 questions already written, and if it's okay with you, I will read this. Jorge, I don't know if you have any other question for William, or you want to have some more time to have to raise another question, and let us go with the questions from the floor.
Yes, we have 3 questions here, and I will read out from Pablo Pairo. Hello, I'm Pablo Pairo, based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., working to promote mezcal internationally. Among the challenges being faced by the Irish whiskey category relating to sustainability, which areas are consumers most concerned about? For example, package or recycling, or use of water, or use of renewable energies? Thank you. This is one question. The next one, it's Juan Alvarez. Thank you for your very interesting presentation, William. Also, thanks to Sergio and Jorge for this event. My question is, has the Irish Whiskey Council faced resistance over the world in obtaining recognition as an appellation of origin, GI, rather than through certification marks? For example, Tequila's Council have faced this problem for several years. The US, for instance, Cheers. And the last one is Natalie Nathan. May I ask whether the bottling of Irish whiskey is always taking place in Ireland?
Okay, thank you, Jorge. And I can see those questions as well on my screen, so I can read them. So I might just go backwards. I might start with Natalie because it's the most straightforward question. No, bottling does not need to take place on the island of Ireland. All of the distilling and the maturation must take place on the island of Ireland, but bottling can take place elsewhere. So we do see Irish whiskey being moved, and if it's moved off the island, it has to be moved in inert containers. So you cannot send a wooden barrel to America or Mexico. It has to be shipped in, stainless steel or plastic. But yes, bottling can take place off the island. In relation to the next question on GIs or certification marks, yes, we have faced resistance, and indeed in the United States is case in point. The TTB regulations recognise Irish whiskey not as a GI, but as it gives it a protected spirit. We're currently applying for a certification mark in the United States to give us an extra layer of protection, but still that won't be as strong as what we have in other markets with a GI. There are other markets where we have just found it very difficult to get our GI registered. So Russia is a case in point. They have a Russian GI, a law to protect GIs, but at the moment it's proving too difficult for us to get a GI registered. And in other markets we found that. So, what we do is, and we have 2 legal advisors who work full-time on this, we go with whatever the strongest protection is in a given market. It's not perfect in every market, but we have to work with the laws of that country. So sometimes, as I say, GI, sometimes certification marks, sometimes it could be something different in the law of that country. It would be great if GIs were recognized across the board, and that would be super, but it's not the case yet. And look, if after this there's any specific questions, I'm very happy to do follow up or to ask my legal colleagues to follow up with members here on an individual basis if that helped. Finally, I was interested. I was just laughing to myself about Pablo's question, because we know sustainability is a big issue, but next week we're putting out a survey to our members to understand what are their biggest concerns. So I could say come back to me in a few weeks, but what we know already is, all of these things. So for a lot of our distilleries, a lot of our maybe older distilleries, and of course some of them aren't that old, but some are, moving to a zero carbon is a big priority, and it's a big issue for us at the moment, and there's a lobbying government to see if there's funding support there available for that transition. What we've seen is packaging is now an issue. It emerged over the past year in terms of the big increase in direct-to-consumer and online sales, and concerns about sustainable packaging. So avoiding plastic and air bubbles and all of this. But I think there is a big discussion about to kick off in Europe about the type of glass and the heaviness of the glass that's going into spirits bottles as opposed to wine bottles, and I think that's a debate we do need to watch. Use of water has been a big issue for a number of years for us, and I think it started out not about a concern for sustainability, but just because water becomes so expensive. So companies were looking to see how they could conserve water, reduce their water. We use a lot of water to cut or to mix in with the whiskey to reduce the ABV, but also in the production of whiskey, and also water used in cooling systems and so on. So water conservation, water reuse has been a big topic, and we've done a lot of work on that over recent years. But there's a whole range of other issues, sustainability in the supply chain, looking at our relationship with our farmers. So there's quite a lot happening in this space. And I know we had a meeting earlier this week with Origin, who are the international group representing GI categories. They're starting work in terms of developing a sustainability agenda. And as I said in my last slide, we're very conscious that we need to develop a new narrative on sustainability. The EU Commission's trade strategy, which was launched last month, puts a very big focus on sustainability in trade policy. And we know that if we're having conversations, it goes back to Jorge's last point about engaging with government and engaging with the EU Commission. We can't talk to government or the EU Commission anymore about trade without having sustainability on the agenda. So we have to develop that narrative, and I think it's going to be an issue for us all in the spirits industry going forward. But I think, yeah, as transition to zero carbon in production, water conservation, sustainable packaging would probably be three of the big issues.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, William. Of course, we are very happy to have Natalie here. It's a good friend of us and a very, how can I say, a lover of appellations of origin as well as geographical indications. Thank you, Natalie, for being with us. I know also that you have other colleagues here already invited. And we have also here a question of a very good friend of us, Ivo Gagliuffi. That he's, as you know, the former president of the Indecopi, that it's the office in charge of the intellectual property and competence matters in Peru. And Ivo, right now, he's in a firm in Garrigues, that it's also a very well-reputed firm in the industry. And he's raising a very interesting question too. It's maybe it's not so political, but it's a very interesting question. And for the audience, I will read it. It's: how are the Irish and Scottish whiskey producers dealing or facing the appearance of new country whiskies as Japanese, Canadian, or even Indian whiskey? Are you going to fight against them, or just coexist with them, but highlighting the added value of your product?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I mean, first of all, as a whiskey industry, we never say we're better than Scotch or Canadian or bourbon, but we say we're different. So I think the second part of that, which was, are we going to coexist and highlight the added value? Yes, that's what we do. We've no problem with whiskies from any other country. Competition is great; it drives innovation, and I have had the opportunity to speak with whiskey producers in other countries where there wouldn't be a tradition of whiskey producing, places like Belgium and so on. It is very exciting to see them producing whiskey. However, the big risk here is that countries could decide to change the rules of whiskey in their country to support a new industry in that. So, for example, Irish and Scotch were very different categories, but we all agree that whiskey has to be aged for a minimum of 3 years. We all have certain rules. What happens if in places, and I'm not going to name any country, but you could pick any country in potentially Asia or Latin America or Africa, and they decide, well, we have a new industry, a new whiskey industry in our country. We want to give them a help by changing the rules. So you can call your spirit whiskey if it's been matured for 2 years or even 1 year, or you can use practices that are not allowed in other markets. If we see a lessening of the overall standard of whiskey, then it is something we will have to fight against. And I think there is a concern, and we are seeing countries adopting different standards now. Ultimately, we're very happy to coexist and compete fairly and openly with any other whiskey that is real whiskey. We don't want to see spirits that are aged 1 year, of a lower standard being called whiskey. That is something that we would be concerned about. And I think there is a threat of that, something we're being vigilant about.
Yeah, it's excellent. Of course, I understand that it's much, much better for your business, not devoting to fight, but devoting to distribute better your product, to distinguish it. And I may say so that making some alliances or not maybe a joint venture, in fact, but some alliances in order to put a common face among the governments, for example, in order to have protected the appellations of origin or the geographical indications. It's much more better. It's more productive than fighting or only fighting back or trying to say that your product is better than others. Well, here Ivo mentioned a very important whiskey makers as the Japanese. However, all of us also know this category of whiskeys from the United States that also have their own reputation, and the reputation of this Kentucky whiskey or Tennessee whiskey, and they have also the product. It's a different category. However, I think that working together in order to enforce and to reinforce the appellations of origin, the geographical indications is a better point of view, I think so. Thank you, William. It's a very, very interesting comment. I have right now here. Oh, here it's a comment on Ivo. It's thanking for the event. Thank you, Ivo, for being with us. You know that you are really always invited. Jorge, I don't know if you have another question for William or also I'm asking to the floor if there is another question before closing this event. Jorge, do you have another question? Your mic is off.
I'd like to thank William for taking the time and talking to us about your experience. It's really grateful, and it's we're really inspired for what you have been doing, and especially in a very short period of time. No, you achieved many things, and also what you say, no, with only 4 people in your office, you're being capable of doing many things. So that's really fantastic job you have been done. And well, I really appreciate that to you and to your team. And hopefully we can talk again, and probably we can share how to taste Irish whiskey and how to taste mezcal. So probably that could be like a good experience event in the future.
Yes.
No, just thank you for the opportunity to present. You know, it was, and thank you for the questions. It's always good to hear what the current, I suppose, interests are. You know, obviously we'd love to invite producers to come to Ireland at some stage, and indeed I would hope to visit Mexico myself at some stage whenever we're allowed travel again. And you know, if maybe there's a scope for doing some maybe an online joint tasting at some stage in the near future. I'm happy to talk about that offline, but I've really enjoyed this event, and I just want to wish all the best to all of the members of Cluster Mezcal Oaxaca, and all the very best in your future growth and the development and protection of your geographic indication. And thank you, Sergio, for hosting us.
Many thanks, William, Jorge. Many thanks. And lastly, please let me share with our audience that in the spirit of announcing of developing the geographical indications as well as the appellations of origin in Mexico, we are preparing other very interesting lectures as today's, and the next one will be with cognac. We have already invited Amandine, that I'm sure that you know here, and Amandine will be with us in a couple of weeks. I will send an invitation. Of course, William, you're warmly invited to join us, and in the last week of the next month of April, we will have also Sherry, the Sherry Regulatory Council, and the Jerez, the Sherry, and all of these efforts are in order to enhance, as I mentioned, as developing and let the people know about specific appellations of origin, regulations, experiences, and well, many thanks for all your time. William, thank you for your time. Jorge, thank you for your time. I know that your schedules are busy. However, it's fantastic to having you, all of you here. Also, well, I have here Cesar Saldaña. Cesar, it's from Sherry. William, I think that you know Cesar. I'm pretty sure it's a very well known person in the industry. And Cesar, it's fantastic that we have here. And well, thank you to all of you. As you know, this event, it's already recorded, will be in disposition in YouTube, as well as in the Cluster Mezcal Oaxaca's Facebook homepage. So if someone wants to go there and check it, you are invited. The order is not only to do these documents, but also have this for the future, for reference. Thank you, Margarita, for your comment, and well, have a nice day. Have a nice vacations week for all that are planning to go there. Please be careful. Please don't forget that we are in pandemic. So be careful. Keep healthy, and well, bye bye, and see you really soon. Thank you.